Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with the final session for the day. The speakers for this session are Mr. Benjamin Yap, Deputy CEO, Business of the Amaravati Project Management, Dr. Divya Nambiar, Senior Consultant, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Government of India, and Mr. Atul Khosla, Vice President, Human Resources, Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa, Mondelēz International. The session will be chaired by Dr. Dipinder S Randhawa, Senior Research Fellow, ISAS. I now hand over to Dr. Randhawa.
Thank you, Ankush. Good morning and warm welcome to the concluding session of the workshop. So thematically, the workshop was organized along 3 lines, looking at the legacy, what's been going on, and that was the focus of the discussion yesterday afternoon and this morning, as well as the earlier session. And as you would have seen in Mr. Manish Sabharwal's presentation, hints of that, we're now going to look ahead. We're faced with significant challenges ahead. One of the themes was industrialization. With the increasing automation and fragmentation and extended supply chains, there are serious questions about what industrialization means and what kind of skills are required. The other is automation as well. There's hardly a manufacturing enterprise today where you don't need a sharp level of cognitive skills, the ability to work through manuals, for instance. That is an issue. A related issue, which is not so much pertinent in India perhaps, is what happens as older workers become redundant. And the first time I heard this actually was, I didn't know what skills development meant, was President Clinton was talking about retooling and re-equipping the American worker for the modern workforce. Of course, that's not entirely been a success, and a lot of the people who were marginalized at that point of time are the ones who, in a sense, implicitly brought in the new president of the United States. The disenchantment that resulted as a result of displaced labor it's a major contributor to Trump's elevation to the presidency. So re-equipping people who are have become redundant in the modern workforce is a critical challenge as well. Also, with increasing graying of the population, that becomes a financial issue as well, as pension funds are becoming increasingly underfunded. We have a very distinguished panel and covering a wide spectrum. So, the privilege in having Mr. Benjamin Yap, he was, if I may describe it, as a very old Asia and India hand with extensive experience earlier through IE Singapore. And now he's heading to Amaravati, flagship project, leading large part of Singapore's endeavors in that place, and he's uniquely equipped to speak of skills development in that domain. We're very pleased to have with us Dr. Divya Nambiar, right from her graduate school work. She's been in this domain, and that's a rare configuration, actually. Field work at NITI in Tamil Nadu and subsequently for consulting, and now she's had a very long tenure with the ministry as well, so it brings a wealth of experience with her. And Mr. Atul Khosla, Vice President of Mondelēz International, he holds responsibility for the Asia-Pac region, the Middle East and Africa, especially all emerging markets put together. But before this, he had extensive experience both in the manufacturing and services sector. He'll be bringing a lot of that wisdom within to us. We have about 20 minutes for each of the speakers. So, Ben, please.
Thank you, Dr. Dipinder. Thank you, ISAS, for having me here this morning. Thank you all for being here as well. I just want to share a little bit about my experience first and also my background. I'm new to the project, the Amaravati project, which is a new capital city that the state of Andhra Pradesh is developing. It's a greenfield project just by the Krishna River. And it's a very deeply aspirational project where the government of Andhra Pradesh is asking very deep questions as to what are the types of skills, what are the types of jobs, how will the economy of the state shape up in the coming years ahead. And for those of us following the story, the India story, this is on the back of a government change, a political change in 2014, where the BJP came to power at the national level, and then the various states around that time. The state of Andhra was bifurcated into Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. And then because of the bifurcation, Andhra Pradesh has to develop a new capital city. Prior to joining this role that I'm in, I used to be working for the Singapore government in an agency called Enterprise Singapore, which is promoting Singapore's companies overseas or exporting Singapore's economy. Spent some time in New Delhi, also some time in Mumbai, and that experience also led me to think a little bit about how Singapore, or rather how industries can be relevant to India as a market. So today what I would like to share is some perspectives, I would say, about how I see markets affecting, being one of the demand drivers for skills and for jobs. And specifically for a market like India, in respect to Singapore, India, I would say, presents a very unique opportunity in that it is both a local domestic market as well as a global market. I think that distinction is important. The reason is that when you look at India compared to Singapore here, India exports about 40% of its GDP. Singapore is about 3 times or 300%. And so a large part of what Singapore is doing, it's very tied to global. And in this sense, prices of what happens in the world will affect us, movements and shifts will affect Singapore a little bit. But in the case of India, there is a unique blend of both global and domestic. And that makes India a very interesting and exciting market. Coupled with the fact that it is growing at 7%, 8% per year. I think this is where a distinction should be made when we ask the question about skills and about jobs. The jobs that we want to create, are they domestic or are they for export? I think that distinction is important because that also leads policymakers to think about, well, how do we address these two segments? Should we integrate these two segments? Should skills that are developed domestically at some point be transformed into global skills? So that's one distinction that I would like to highlight here with respect to India. And of course, in this context, the question then is, what policies do we enact? How do we shape policies? What institutions do we create? And how do we create jobs? How do we transform jobs? And in the case of a global scenario, how do we even import capabilities? And these are all the levers that I can see right now, India government moving these levers, opening the doors, creating every channel they can, so that all these different forces, all these dynamics come to play in the country that is coming up and growing. In the other way, I look at Singapore now, we're asking very deep questions. We have been growing and transforming along a particular curve, and we have been exploring in the earlier days sectorial growth. The early days was about manufacturing, and we developed very deep verticals. The Singapore approach historically has been chasing down certain verticals, electronics, chemicals, manufacturing, and all that. And today we are asking a deeper question in the Singapore context. What are the future skills? And I think you would hear quite often in the public domain, words are being discussed about jobs that don't even exist today but will exist in 20 years and all that. But one archetype that comes to mind is that the future economy will be a bit more ecosystem driven. It's going to be a bit more network driven. And because of that, the model in which businesses anchor themselves globally will create new types of jobs, new types of demand, new types of skills. That is something that is shifting, that is moving. We are experiencing it in Singapore. And I think to some extent, India also is feeling its effects. So let me highlight a few examples here. I think anecdotally this year, I think is the first time we hear where there is a report talking about IT firms in India downsizing. I mean, this is really quite unprecedented. In a world that is becoming more digital, the digital companies in India, Infosys, Wipro, reportedly are shedding headcount from 50,000, some even say about 200,000 workers this year. So world is becoming more digital. India is finding that, well, my digital talent needs to transform. So it's really kind of a, antithetical to the idea of, well, what's happening here? So I think the realities of it can be explained where you look at India as a market. The IT market for India has always been exporting, and therefore it's actually a global scale. And because the global climate is changing, today what we find in India, the IT market itself begins to shift. And they are losing some headcount, they have to restructure, they have to find certain things. And India did a fine job in the last 20 years of exploring what I call the sectorial vertical. ITSEZ, going very deep, giving a lot of incentives to create IT assets, business parks or IT parks, create huge campuses and all that. That particular construct, I think, is being questioned, or is changing, or being transformed, simply because of global shifts. So again, we see that dynamic happening. The other dynamic that's happening in India, which I feel has so much potential that is great, that is not so much affected by global shifts, is the fact that India itself indigenously has a lot of demand internally that can be unlocked just from skills upgradation. And these are the not so tech-driven sectors. These are probably skills that can be developed within India, that can grow, that also has a domestic market, which I feel is very exciting. And that's where I sense that for policymakers, it's important for us to look at our own national jurisdictions and ask some very deep questions about whether there's a global element or a domestic element. So I'll give you a few examples. In the area of, let's say, nursing, in the area of hairstyling, or even hospitality, you will find that many of such skills and the demand for such skills could be developed, could be grown, could be enhanced, could be transformed in India as a territory. And that alone could create significant value, both for the individual and also for the nation. So I think this is where I feel we need to look at it into these two spaces. Now, coming to the ecosystem portion, which I talked about earlier, where we are at now in Singapore is a question about, well, if we don't look at industry verticals and we want to create an ecosystem, and we are, if I may say, we are a bunch of people in Singapore that don't really like to talk to each other. Most of the time we stick to ourselves, we take the train, and even in the lift we don't talk to anybody and all that. How do we get people in Singapore and whoever is living and working in Singapore to get to know each other, network? Can we create such a community? And that is beginning to engender discussions around assets that we should develop. So now, as I step into a new role that develops assets both in Singapore and India, in my capacity in Ascendas-Singbridge and Sembcorp, and in the joint venture that we are doing in Amaravati, the question that I'm asking myself is, if I am given a green field in India to create a space, create a new capital city, create a new catalytic campus, a business campus, what form should it take? And I'm actually, I must say, drawing a bit of a loss, a bit of a blank here. So although I came to this dialogue to share my experience, I'm also hoping through this dialogue session to gather views from everyone as to what are the kind of spaces we should create. And I think a good way to sum up this question is through a book that I read about 15, 20 years ago. The title quite aptly named The Elephant and the Flea. This is a book by a gentleman called Charles Handy, who left his corporate job some 15, 20 years ago in Shell to come out and become a freelance writer. And I think along the way he became a professor of business in the London School or something. But in a very tongue-in-cheek way, he imagined the future would look like this. Large corporations and using contractors, small contractors every now and then on an ad hoc basis. The small contractors are highly skilled, very valuable, they offer particular service. As and when they are like fleas, they live on the elephant as the elephant marches through, and they kind of provide a service to the elephant, hopefully not too itchy and all that, but provide some kind of, they ride along with the elephant and they go. And that model is not necessarily an employee one, but a contractor, a freelance contractor. So he postulated that will be the experience in the future. And today we are seeing some of that happen. What is called the gig economy. And that's really, for a lot of people, that's pretty unsettling, and for policymakers asking very deep questions about, are we really a gig economy, or this is a new form of slavery and all that. But I think it's very apt that this gentleman asked this question, and I would say The same question I'm asking today is, if we are going to create and look at new skills, the question that comes along with it as policymakers and as asset developers, in my case, developing spaces, office spaces and all that, what are the type of ecosystems that we can create? And on that front, what are the different types of enablers, whether it's digital, in nature, where you can have different people working in different countries coming together and all that. All these layers begin to come into play and make it very exciting. A good way to look at it, I think, is the startup community, where the startups really are trying to find big customers, but at the same time trying to be very lean on resource, and then find each other and lean on each other, and they very quickly form networks. And I think today we even track not just the number of startups, but we even rank global ecosystems. The US being one of the biggest ones, Israel, China, Singapore tries to be one as well, and then Switzerland and all that. I think the thinking around ecosystems has to be part and parcel of what we are looking at in the area of skills. If we want to look towards the future, this is definitely one element. If we want to look to the current, then I would say we have to ask ourselves, as policymakers and as people who operate within markets, what is the context of our market? If it's domestic, what can we bring to it? So I would just want to, at this point, just end off by saying that there are a few things that come to my mind at this point would be, if I was to create a new capital city, currently it's empty, do I go about chasing sectors, logistics, manufacturing, and get a big company, whether it's a Tata or Foxconn or something, come here and create a factory? Is that if I'm going to do that, what are the different economic policies I would want to ask the government for? Is that the approach? Or should I say that, well, actually I am a master planner, a master developer. There are various elements of an ecosystem that I need to bring together. There needs to be a school, and the government should look at it a more holistic way and offer incentives for schools to come in, and schools could be private, could be public, offer a kind of, not necessarily a financial incentive, but offer maybe a green lane, offer certain concession in terms of time for certain elements to incubate, certain services like, you might find it funny, but like maybe a golf course, if you want to bring in Japanese investors, for example, part and parcel of the investment also includes Japanese executives moving in. They would want to have a certain lifestyle as well as they move in. So creating an ecosystem is not something that the government or any policymaker usually think about. We tend to think along the line of verticals. So these are some of the thoughts in my mind. That if you bring in a golf course, it's not very land intensive. What is the economic value to a state or to a government? Because it's a large tract of land. Can we do it differently? Can we do it somewhere else? And this translates to a physical space, a physical manifestation that will begin the ecosystem. So I kind of think of myself as, in my new role, as trying to think about how to, what's the term, create an aquarium, where you have a little thing for some small fishes to swim here, you have a little pump there for water, for air to come in, and you have a bit of glass as a showcase. You also need people to come and see the value of the fish tank, invest, put their fishes in. And those kind of things need to come in. And I think integration then would be the key to this. So I would say that looking forward to looking at how the future skills would look like. I'm not an industrialist, so I won't be able to comment on what are the different types of skills. But I do imagine that if I can create an ecosystem, a place, and I can work within a framework of the government, within a territory, to begin to, what we call catalyze, bring about more and more of these mutually reinforcing elements, then I think we will more or less got the recipe right. Probably the cake hopefully will bake itself as we go. So I think I just want to leave you with these thoughts. Markets as the key driver for skills, for jobs, and markets could be domestic, could be global in nature. Sectors, when we look at it, could be verticals, and I think they continue to offer value. India pursues that very well. But there's also an area I call ecosystems. And ecosystems is something that is a little new, that we are seeing in Singapore. And I suspect India will very quickly, or is already looking at creating all these elements in their smart cities all across India, being a very IT-enabled, digital-enabled country. And last but not least, the context of it is really what we see happening in startups, what we see happening in what I call the gig economy, and different what I call business models that are beginning to appear, beginning to mushroom in and around some of these transformations, and what is the kind of physical space as a developer, as a real estate company we have to create in terms of the communities that we want to build together with government. I'll just end here. I think I've spoken quite a lot. I do apologize, I don't have a presentation. I usually at the workshop try to put all this down into a presentation, but it's a bit pressed for time this time. I would appreciate any comments, any questions or suggestions after this. Thank you.
Thank you. When we get on the questions a little bit later, but the moment you mentioned design of a new city, there were some disquieting visions that I had of Rapido and Brasilia,
Yes.
which are not exactly the advocacy, but you mentioned the gig economy, and one thing you can take heart, particularly in Andhra Pradesh, is the extraordinary skilled and diverse diaspora in the IT sector, which has left its imprint in the global arena. And Silicon Valley has so many amazingly successful examples. So perhaps that gives you some
Yes,
context.
in fact, the Andhra diaspora, the Telugu diaspora, is also one element that, as a city builder, we are thinking about how it takes the whole community, not just the community in the country, the community outside the country, they can contribute in their own way.
Very remarkably good. I pleasure to introduce Dr. Divya Nambiar next.
Very good afternoon to everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be here, so thank you so much for inviting me. In my talk today, the objective is to actually ask a number of different questions rather than providing any answers. So what I aim to do is to connect multiple perspectives, the perspectives of trainees, employers, and policy, and explore this new topic of future skills and future work, which has become a dominant theme in public policy in India. So the world of work is on the cusp of transformation. And at the heart of this transformation lies the issue of skills. My own experience of the sector of skills began in places like this, in large job fair sites, where large numbers of young women largely who were working in the agricultural sector or in traditional sectors like handloom weaving, were aspiring to jobs in the new kinds of workplaces that emerged in industrial clusters in Tamil Nadu. For the first time in 2008 and 9, private companies and training providers started working with the government and offered skill training programs to rural youth as a means of alleviating poverty. Young people's aspirations grew and they were raised in the process of marketing these programs. So what really happened here was what the sociologist Atul Khosla writes about. He talks about the capacity to aspire, and he argues that the capacity to aspire is quite low amongst people with low levels of skills and low levels of education. And exposure to such programs enhances this capacity and helps them find new pathways out of poverty. And in fact, a lot of the skill training programs are really premised on that idea. But a lot of my own research showed that the capacity to aspire, when it is expanded very quickly, also becomes a burden of expectations. So managing aspirations is really important, and that's why I want to put aspirations at the core of this discussion on future skills and future work, and how is it that the young trainee and the young person can benefit from these larger changes, or how can they be more resilient to these changes. So these two quotes came from my own fieldwork in Tamil Nadu, and they are just there to frame this discussion because they indicate two kinds of trajectories that young people have gone through. The first is the story of a girl called Mala, who for the first time got a certificate and enrolled in this program. This certificate was then stuck in her room on the wall, and she considered herself a failure until she reached this particular point, and she felt that this would give her a pathway to, in the long term, become an entrepreneur and perhaps set up her own tailoring unit. However, when I came back and followed up with interviews over 2 or 3 years, I found that in the first year she did pretty well. By around 9 or 10 months, she was looking for other jobs, and then she did freelance work, earning money out of working at a piece rate. And then she got married and never achieved this dream of opening up a catering unit. There were a whole lot of funding constraints, family pressures, and so on. The second story is a success story of a girl called Madhumati who began as a trainee, worked for 2 years, and she had never seen an industrial sewing machine before. She started as a helper, learned a lot. She started ironing clothes, checking and finishing products, and later on grew within the training organization as a trainer. So you have these kinds of trajectories, and a key question that we are asking us today is what kinds of career paths will be possible in this new kind of workplace of the future where entry-level jobs and low-skill jobs may actually be automated, and so what does the future of young people like this look like? So now I just want to go very quickly and provide just highlights of what the literature says on this topic. So what is really changing in the world of work? So I would argue that there are 4 key critical levers which intersect, and they're causing new kinds of changes. The first, of course, is technology. So new technology such as automation, robotics, 3D printing, artificial intelligence are changing modes of production, they're changing forces of work, but more importantly, they are resulting in new kinds of human relations within the workplace itself, where workers and machines coexist, they need to work with each other. Part of teamwork is not just working with other people, but it's also working with technology and machinery and being comfortable with that. The second key driver that comes linked to technology is the changes in work itself, where there are multiple forms of employment that coexist. And these kinds of forms of employment are even greater in countries like India with a large unorganized sector. So for example, in a garment firm, you have full-time employees, flexible contract workers, and a whole range of subcontractors who are home-based workers who do very fine bits of embroidery or they stitch parts of a product and so on. So you have these multiple kinds of employment within the sector. So how will these kinds of job roles change? And there's very little data on that. Third is, of course, the changes in employment and labor relations, because in the absence of one fixed workplace, what kinds of new relationships will be created? What will be the basis of these relationships? And lastly, it's about skill. And as I said, skill is at the core of the discussion, but the literature shows that the meaning of skill itself has changed and is broadened. So for example, skill has become a multi-dimensional concept. So a small example is in the 1930s, there was one of the first papers on skill, which defined skill in very narrow terms. They argue that skill is defined in terms of performing a specific task to perfection. However, over time, today's skills includes technical skills, soft skills, the ability to be agile and adapt, to learn. So the meaning of skills has broadened. And this, I think, will broaden even more when we talk about new kinds of workplaces, because entrepreneurial skills becomes important. And the boundaries between a worker and an entrepreneur and a contractor are all getting blurred. So the literature says that given these big changes, there are going to be huge changes in the kinds of jobs, but also job losses is a big theme. So just to give you some small examples, when I started my field work in Tamil Nadu in 2007, 2008, I worked in new workplaces in large special economic zones in the electronics sector. So, for example, Nokia had a huge plant there, and just next to the Nokia plant was a Foxconn plant. They were employing 7,000-8,000 workers, and every year the number of workers grew from 2007-8 to 2010. However, today, Foxconn in a recent report has just said that 70% of their workforce and the operators, all those job roles are now going to be automated, and robots are going to take over those job roles. And you can see the impact of that in India with the Nokia SEZ, which was this huge aspiring workplace of 2006, has closed down completely. Thousands of people have also lost their jobs, and because the skill training that they received was so specific to assembling Nokia mobile phones, they were unable to adapt. So as a result, many of them went back into skills training and are working as beauticians. Some of them are going back to the garment industry as sewing machine operating. But there's also a wastage in the training that has taken place. So these are the kind of questions and issues that I think we need to keep in mind when we talk about future skills and future work. Given the issue of job losses, there are also new kinds of skills that will be valued. So yes, we did read just 2 days ago in the newspaper about huge job losses, especially in the IT sector, where I think companies like TCS and Wipro have actually had a lot of job losses. However, what we've also seen is new kinds of skills are valued. So while specific jobs in the IT sector may have decreased, IT skills and such as programming are valuable across sector. In fact, it's become a core skill like communication skills. So there's a shift as well in that sense, which I think we need to take into account. And the current literature so far is really dominated by very sort of rigorous quantitative sort of work, or they are short kinds of environmental scans that give a macro perspective and an overview. So you have large consulting firms who are giving a sense of what are the future trends, what should we look at. Which sectors will be affected. However, I think these studies don't really look at the field level data that also Professor Gurvila mentioned. But more importantly, they don't give us a sense of the nuances of the Indian economy. So even the Indian studies do not tell us how will the informal sector be affected. How will workers, will home-based workers have work to do if these big changes take place? And the answer is, and this is something that I've also been part of discussions that we've talked about in the ministry, where actually in India it's not as if all these changes are going to transform industry overnight. Industry 4.0 will have to coexist with older forms of work and older industry. So how do we manage and create a balance in this kind of complex kind of economy that we have today? So therefore, I think it's really important to take into account these contextual challenges. I find it really interesting to read the literature on the employer perspective, because there are these key words that keep popping up at me when I read it. So you talk about flexibility, adaptability, agility, risk, resilience, ability to learn, and not to be cynical, but sometimes I feel that it tends to romanticize this new future that's coming up. But I think it's really important for us to realize that these kinds of changes have a potential to also create a lot of vulnerability. And sociological studies have shown that it's the most vulnerable people of society who can be affected by these changes. So how do we create a framework for resilience in this kind of ecosystem? How do we help young people manage risk effectively? These are the kinds of questions that I think we need to think about. So this brings me to another point which I found quite interesting in this book by the sociologist Richard Sennett. It's a very interesting book called Craftsman. And he makes a very important distinction between skill and craft. And he argues that skill is a very narrow concept. It's narrow precisely because it is instrumental. It's defined in instrumental terms because it's about performing a specific set of tasks to perfection, to a certain degree of efficiency. However, craft is much broader, because craft is not just about getting the skill right to perform the task, but it's about an attitudinal sort of quality. It's about transforming your work into a vocation. It's about caring about what you do and about the pursuit of excellence. Excellence is the goal. It's not just getting a product right in those 30 seconds and moving on to the next. And therefore, with these big changes, I think we need to redefine skills and to include this dimension of craft. Which is why in Germany, I find it very interesting that they talk about craftsmen, not skilled workers. They have industry chambers focused on crafts, not skills, because it's not an instrumental definition of skill. but skills has an intrinsic dimension, and I think that is the kind of value that we need to cultivate when we train young people. There's a value what you're doing intrinsically for its own sake, very much like education. So against this background, I think there are a lot of unanswered questions, and there's a need for a lot of research on this. I just thought I'd highlight some of these questions. So the first is on the unorganized sector and how it will be affected, but also how will the career pathways of workers change. So I think it's really important to have a longitudinal research project which follows the lives of these workers over time, maybe over a 3 to 5 year period, to see how career pathways actually change and move over time. And I think this could be done very well through in-depth field level analysis that Professor Kuru talked about. And also, how should our skills system adapt to these changes? So one of the points that came up repeatedly was on including upskilling and reskilling and making that an integral part of the skills system. But this would also mean that perhaps our short-term training programs will need to increasingly focus on these aspects, and we need to have multiple entry and exit points so that even older workers can come back, learn new skills, and this becomes not a new trend but actually a norm over time. And lastly, how do you prepare young people to manage change? Because perhaps the most important skill in this rapidly changing workforce is to be able to manage change effectively and to take advantage of new opportunities. So perhaps this is something that we need to inculcate in our young skill trainees at an early stage rather than later on when they face the challenges of work and the workplace. So against this background, there's been a lot of discussion on these issues. There have been conferences and workshops in India, but also with some of my colleagues at the National Skill Development Corporation, we've had a few discussions. So I just wanted to sort of end by just highlighting what are some of the things that we're thinking about. So one thing is we've started putting a lot of the training content online to ensure that workers can access content on their mobile phones so that they can keep learning while they are in their free time, but also can upgrade their skills. We've also had discussions about can we create an alumni network so trainees are connected to each other, they understand how to manage this and how to manage challenges together and sort of take advantage of that kind of collective wisdom, and also perhaps link these trainees and alumni to mentors who can guide them on a sustainable career pathway. And lastly, and this is a question perhaps I have also to people from Singapore, can we use new technologies actually to help address these challenges? So at a very basic level, we were talking about can blockchain technology, for example, be used for post-placement tracking of workers? Will that help us track and understand how workers are actually faring so that we can actually track them not just from the training center to their first job, but for every job over the course of their career? So I think technology also will help us answer a lot of these questions if we are able to leverage it properly. And lastly, I want to end with this point because public policy is future-oriented and we're always thinking about the future. But in that process, we should not forget that there are also skills that are disappearing. India has a huge, rich knowledge base on traditional skills, especially in the handicrafts and craft sector. So in this rush to address the challenges of Industry 4.0 and thinking about skills of the future, we should lose the traditional skills that really make India what it is. So can we try and also focus on the disappearing skills and our own heritage and ensure that we preserve that as we move on to the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nambiar. You've raised some very important questions. One is an area that's been quite neglected, and that's the unorganized sector. What's been forgotten very often, and is bewildering, and to say that, put it mildly, after the events of November 8th last year, is the intricate links between the formal and the informal sector. And during the trip through the Northwest, and those through some ITIs, I just happened to see a relatively affluent and clean hamlet. And the driver pointed out his sister-in-law was working, and that entire area, the women had sewing machines, they had learned for those, and they were doing piecemeal work, stitching as well. And that had, over time, because they were able to do it in their own time, it had imparted a great deal of flexibility, autonomy, and agency to the women. And obviously you can imagine the repercussions for Andor. Another instance that came to mind actually was a diplomat who was posted in Singapore. His prior posting, interestingly, was in Tunisia, which is where the Arab Spring started off. And he mentioned, he said, it's really ironic that the president, I forget the name at that time, had done a very good job of education, imparting higher skills. The problem was there were no jobs forthcoming and increasing groundswell of frustration and agony. And that, in some sense, was the catalyst for, I wouldn't say it went so far to say the genesis, but it's probably the light that stoked the initial rebellion. But I'm sure the questions on the informal sector and formal sector linkages are more important for the future as jobs become scarcer. We've seen that from the UNDP ILO reports as well. I'll now turn to Mr. Atul Khosla, who's going to complete run of the story from a corporate, from a very extended experience in the corporate sector. Mr. Khosla.
Right, well, first it's a privilege to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'll start with a little bit of my introduction and what I do and the organization I work for. So my next 15 minutes, I'll focus on the industry or more pragmatic side of how do we really build employable skills, which can be utilized across the boundaries. Obviously with a very specific focus on India, but even beyond India, there are a lot of areas where the challenges and opportunities are similar. So I'm going to cover a bit of that. My career so far has been in dysfunction in human resources all my life. Worked there. First half of my employment was in the plants or factories, as in the sense I have some manufacturing experience, working in the trade unions, working in the engineering industry, and then the foods industry. And then the second half of my career has been outside India, predominantly in Asia, but I've worked in Europe for around 4 or 5 years and then in the US for another 4 or 5 years. So I'll try to share a more comparative perspective in terms of where the gaps or opportunities are. So what I'm going to do, I will use a couple of examples to build the context, and then I will get into the specificity of where the opportunities or challenges are. And I'm going to share 2 contexts with you. One, I talked a little bit about the telephony or mobile revolution in India. I worked very briefly in this industry. I was head HR for a company called Airtel, which is a market leader in the telecom space in India for a very brief period. And then I've been working the retail side or in the consumer goods side. So I didn't mention, by the way, I work in Mondelēz. We make and sell products like, in the snacking category, products like Cadbury chocolates, Bournvita, Oreo biscuits, and all the good stuff which we enjoy. I have the responsibility for Asia, Middle East, Africa region, which is around 30,000 people, which is 1/3 of our total employment worldwide. And it's one of the fastest growing regions. We have the responsibility of driving growth for Mondelēz across the world. So why I'm taking these 2 examples, one obviously close to me, and I was part of this whole kind of telecom wave in India when this was picking up, and I experienced firsthand some of the challenges of building a strong workforce with the right or relevant skills at that time. And two, now that I look, China is one of our bigger markets, and I see a revolution of e-commerce happening in China, and what it means from a skill perspective or a talent perspective for the industry. I want to touch upon that. So going back to India, telecom industry in India, it is today the second largest telecom market in the world, with over 90% density or telecom penetration. And I think there is no other category I can think of in any space which has such a high, consistent penetration across the geography of India. It's also the 3rd largest internet market in the world. And if you see the trend of last 10 years, I was, by the way, in 2006, 2007 with Airtel. I took a brief stint to go back to India for personal reasons, and I worked for Airtel at that time. When it was just picking up, the wave was kind of picking up. If you see from 2007 to 2017, the last 10 years, telecom or mobile industry in India has grown 4 times the GDP growth of India. And despite the fact that availability of infrastructure or the telephone infrastructure was not moving with the same space or same speed. And if you look at that, there are factors which were driving that growth. There was a very strong pull in the consumers. I take again Airtel example. We were getting licenses to operate in different states of India at that time, but we did not have sufficient amount of skilled talent available to both manufacturing or the technical side of the business or the commercial side of the business. And those skills were new. So to give you a little bit of a flavor, we were putting up these mobile towers in very remote parts of the country. And this was a very high-end technology which needed a certain kind of infrastructure to maintain. So every tower, for example, needed to be the transponders in the towers were needed to be put up in an air-conditioned space in an area where even the electricity had not reached. And this was such a big dichotomy of putting a very high-end technology infrastructure in spaces where even the basic infrastructure was not there. And people were not used to working in a setup. There were factories over there, but working in a setup where there are 2 or 3 people manning this mobile tower in the middle of nowhere to make sure that there was a sufficient coverage of mobile telephone. And it was a very big issue in terms of building that skill at a pace, at a speed which was not enabled by the broader ecosystem, as Benjamin mentioned. On the commercial side, we were trying to hire people from the FMCG industry to go and sell airtimes. People were not used to sell airtime. They could sell a product, a cola or I don't know, a biscuit, but they didn't know how to go to a consumer and sell something which they can't feel, can't touch. So every company at that time was trying to build a parallel infrastructure. There was no stream or a common source of skills coming in, and there were suboptimal efforts by the organizations to build those skills. And I remember, by the way, a little bit of a joke in my team was that we should put up boards outside our offices that trespassers would be hired. So anyone who comes in, we needed so many people that we can bring them in and we could train them. So it's kind of just one reflection or a reaction of how industry is kind of lagging behind in terms of getting the relevant skills or employable skills, and I'll talk a little more about that. The other example which is very relevant in today's world, and I was 2 weeks back in China, and I put up a picture here. I've never seen emptier aisles in hypermarkets than what I've seen in probably last 10-15 years I've been working in this region. So increasingly people are shifting to an e-commerce platform for the convenience, for the efficiencies, effectiveness, and economy they can get by just going online and ordering. 85% of the e-commerce business is taking place on the mobile phones. People just go to their mobile phone. All of us, probably a lot of us here, must be ordering stuff, from ordering a cab on Uber to buying a gift for somebody. It's so convenient. And industries just lagging behind in terms of building the right infrastructure. And China would be, by 2020, over 60% of the e-commerce market worldwide in retail sector only. So it's moving so fast. India is, by the way, not far behind. It's coming up, and we are trying to get e-commerce skills in the organization, which are go back here. So our e-commerce skills are not really available. So what organizations are doing, they are trying to again take your existing set of people and try to understand what are the shifts and changes required to be e-commerce savvy, if I may say, and then trying to build that skill again individually. So they are picking up their own set of people, like my company too, trying to see what we can do to upgrade, but there is no concerted, common effort to build a skill base which would be enabling this industry to grow, or this segment or category to grow over a period of time. So great examples for us to really think through, so what is changing? And what I see is there's so much change happening, actually faster and unpredictable change, which industry is kind of lagging behind. So we are always following after the changes happen in terms of what we do differently now to meet our next challenge. Economies are more volatile, more unpredictable than those ever were in the past. I mean, China is a great example. A lot of investment went into building China to what it is today. And when the growth is slowing down, a lot of organizations are actually shrinking in terms of size and scale, which they built over a period of the last 7 or 8 years. Great example by Benjamin or his emphasis and because of the world in India. A huge acceleration 10 years back when they built this big, large workforces, trained people, but now they're not jobs, so they are kind of trimming down a very skilled set of people they built over the last 8 to 10 years. So a lot of change is very unpredictable now, and you can't see where the trend is going. There is a pressure to compete, and I'll talk more in the context of leadership development. There is a whole generation of leaders who built their careers in this part of the world during the wave of growth. So there was this huge wave of growth in Asia around 7 or 8 years back. And there was a lot of tailwind where people come in and you just place your products in the market. And there's a big consumer base which is ready to lap it up. And the mindset was, and even I see that even in today's context, this mindset of going into the markets which are where you still have growth opportunities. And I think the shift which we need to look for or drive is that what can create growth. Not look for growth where it happens. How India is growing, so everybody is getting attracted, we should go invest in India. It's about who can or what is driving growth. So in the economies which are more unpredictable, are changing fast, if you have the kind of leadership and kind of talent, the kind of skills, which can actually see how do I leverage this, how do I leverage the circumstances to create growth. And that's the shift you see, by the way. There are organizations which are doing well, and there are organizations which are struggling, both in the context of India and China. Technology is shifting. I think you mentioned about this whole kind of automation happening. And it's interesting. I mean, I walk into our factories and you have, robotic arms picking up chocolates and putting in the boxes. And that's the new world because there is a more efficient, better way of producing which is coming in. But the key is what else is needed and how do you really build that infrastructure which will enable people to learn and understand those skills. And finally, there's a macro environment which is changing. I mean, 2 recent examples in Malaysia we saw last year and in India this year is of GST transition. I mean, it's not re-influenced, but it's changing around us. And some organizations are again faster to pick up the change and react to it. Others are struggling, or a demonetization in India. Or we have, the oil prices in Gulf. We have a huge issue today because the spending capacity is not as much. So how quickly organizations can see and get tuned in to these trends to make sure that we are able to face the new world, which we don't know how it's going to look like. So what is happening is there is an increasing gap in the skills which are required and the skills which are being generated. I was looking at a report from India, ASSOCHAM, or Association of Chamber of Commerce in India, in 2016. There were 500,000 MBAs who passed out from over 5,000 institutes in India. It's amazing. I mean, the number, 500,000 MBA students passing out in a year, over 5,000 institutes, and there were 7% employability of that set of people. So 93% of those folks, I'm sure they got jobs somewhere, but for the courses which they did or for what they aspired to do, they were not able to get those employment or opportunities. And that's the dichotomy of our world, where we need skills. So I gave examples of e-commerce or talent. We don't have enough skill. And we have a stream which is coming out with not the right kind of employable skills available to get those employed. So I think the key is how do you bridge these gaps? And I sometimes feel, in my role, really thinking of what is the gap which we need to really focus on? And how do we focus? Is it only skills? Is it only talent? Or is it something more? Or is it a broader ecosystem? How do we build that ecosystem which will enable us to bridge this gap and make sure that we are able to really build employability and not only employment opportunities. And one final comment on this I want to make is when I was in Europe, one thing which I saw was portability of skills across the European Union. So if you're part of the European Union, you can move around your skills. So if I had a certain skill which was of a certain caliber in one part of Europe, I could move it very, very quickly. And we don't have those opportunities. Our policies here, I mean, I look at the government policies, are not enabling. We have portability of knowledge, which can happen virtually. You can have phone calls and, you can have training programs and you can bring people together. But there's no portability of skills. It takes 4 months to get, employment pass in Indonesia. And by that time, you get somebody to move there, your need is gone. So it's really there's a policy framework, there's a need of skill creation, and they need to talk to each other in some way or the other. So I want to share with you a kind of a framework which is more holistic than the previous one. And I will move this slide. And what is that? I think, and I've tried to simplify it just to make sure that it kind of makes sense from from an academic point of view. So one, I think capacity in the organization, which we typically don't work on. I mean, I said in our business plans when we do for the next year or strategic plan for 3 years, 5 years of the companies, there is not really enough time and enough investment made to understand what are the big macro changes which are going to happen. So you're very much in it now, and I think you make that exactly. It's very tentative, very short term, not really looking out and reading these broader trends to make sure we understand what are the shifts which are happening. If e-commerce is growing, I don't know, 300% in India now, what would it look like 3 to 5 years down for retail, for FMCG industry, and what skills would be required to really meet those requirements? Two, there is a lack of a clear and aligned strategy. I mean, organizations or corporates may have their own very specific view of the situation, and many times when the infrastructure is not there, they try to create their own infrastructure and be included because we want to move on and we want to make sure that the commercial value being generated. I mean, I want to give you an example. We've just put up a big factory, our largest chocolate manufacturing plant in the whole of AMEA region in India. A place called Sri-Sri. It's in Entrepreneurship. Beautiful place, very by the way, good infrastructure. And it's a big plant. It's a 7 square kilometer factory. So when it's fully loaded, when all the lines are in place, it will be the largest chocolate manufacturing site in the world for Mondelēz. And we started with a very clear desire that we want to have a diverse workforce in this factory, gender diverse workforce. And I gave the target to my team in India. I want 50% women working in the factory. But we are not in a technology industry where we should be pioneer, actually leading our diversity agenda. And it was a huge challenge because the ecosystem doesn't enable for you to have 50% women coming in because there is no housing infrastructure, there's a safety and security issues, transportation issues because it's a new kind of industrial area. And then you start seeing the challenges of how do you deal with it. And now we started investing, so we did a little bit of reverse engineering to understand what would it take to get to this goal. So we have now built hostels, we provide security, we have, at the first stage of it, we have created our own infrastructure, but it is dedicated to one factory in probably 150 factories in that area. And it's a little bit kind of a bubble where we're trying to push for something, but unless it's sustainable over a period of time, it's not going to deliver the kind of outcomes we want to see. So finally, I think looking deeper on the capacity, before even we get into what are the skills required or what are the capabilities we need to build, do we have the right organization structure, right designs, right ecosystem? Do we know the bigger, broader trends or changes or macro shifts which are happening? And then do a targeted workforce planning. What kind of workforce do we need in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 years time frame? So that you can start preparing early on and be ahead in the game and reacting to a situation. Then we need to focus on building the right skills or capabilities which need to be deliberate and targeted. I gave this example of MBAs. It doesn't help having 500,000 MBAs passing out when there are not enough jobs. This Tunisia example. It could actually create more frustration when you have educated workforce not able to get the right kind of employment. So how do we really make those focused choices, provide relevant skills which are relevant for the industry going forward? And finally, broad-based experiences. Sometimes we can become very narrow in an environment which is changing so fast and so quickly. Enabling people to acquire skills which can be utilized in multiple ways and not only in a single way. And I know, this elephant in the tea example is made, but that's creating a lot of very sharp skills which can be leveraged. But if that skill is changing, the need is changing very quickly, how do you enable people to acquire skills which will be more relevant in the future, not only today or tomorrow? And finally, I think you talked about the mindsets. And to my mind, that's one of the bigger areas or bigger focus areas. I think we use the specific word for that, for building the right perspective. And mindset, to my mind, for people to really think through, look at the outcomes, and the organization focus on performance. You set the goals and you deliver against the goals, and then you get rewarded and recognized for that. But people need to look at the outcomes and the value generation than performance against the goals. So whatever work I do, if I'm a fitter in a tractor manufacturing factory, what I do, where the value is getting created, once the tractor is fully assembled, what is the role I play in creating that tractor? And I think that linkage is very important. Otherwise, people lose the larger context. And that's where the employability gets created. So if I can see where do I fit in is the broader scheme of things, and where my value creation is coming, I think that's really going to help people to move forward and be ready to change. So if the area where I was creating value is not relevant anymore, what extra or what else can I do? And then you're thinking of where do I need to change and not do more of what I've been doing, but do something different, which I've not done, but I can. So once this equation is working to my mind, so you know the capacity, you know what is required, you're creating the right skill sets and then creating the right attitudes, then you create employability, not employment. Then people are ready to move on and see, okay, maybe this is a new skill I need to pick up, which is coming in, and I can move in there. A lot of salespeople get coming out of these institutes in India and in China and start thinking maybe e-commerce is the new thing, and I got to learn about it and it could help me to be employable in future as the environment develops. So with that, I want to share with you a couple of initiatives we are running here. I mentioned about this factory in Sri City. The other one, this is very recent, we kicked off with the government of Singapore this week actually, on Monday. We are picking up, I'm a little bit conflicted, so apologies for that. We are looking at building a pool of Singaporean talent which can come back, so give them exposure outside Singapore. So we are setting them on 24 months assignments. That was talking to Professor Sarosh during the break, on a very kind of contained and a focused development plans. So they go to countries like India and China and Vietnam and go through a very structured program exposing them to the realities of the emerging markets. They'll be mentored and coached by very senior leaders through this phase, and then they come back and take over. We've got a very high dependence on foreign talent here in Singapore. Take over those roles when this talent is ready to go back to the country. So it's a small initiative that's targeted at creating a pool of talent which is relevant for future and will be kind of running this organization 5-10 years down the line. And once we build a critical mass, this is my sense, we have 34, 40 of these leaders coming back, then it creates a natural pull. Then you are really building a cycle where this kind of program is it gets its life on its own and it's moving on because there's a pull there. So something I think we got to really start shifting our thinking in the corporates, but also in a collective way, with the education institutions, with the governments, to make sure that we're building the right capacity, right capabilities, the right mindsets, but also making sure that the government policies are enabling and building infrastructure which is helping the industry as a whole, but also helping a large chunk of employable workforce, which will be able to fuel the growth engine of this region. So that's what I wanted to share, and happy to discuss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khosla. You hit the nail on the head, as it were. Some very important themes. One was earlier you just spoke of the endemic shortages of skilled labor in a setting where there's a huge oversupply, and then also the challenges that are arising with the rapidly changing nature of the workplace. We'd now like to turn the floor open to questions. We've had 3 outstanding presentations and very diverse, but they sort of make a whole piece. Dr. Yap. Do us take sort of 3 questions at a time.
I feel bad that I asked too many questions. Thank you very much for talking. I enjoyed them very much. So Mr. Khosla mentioned the e-commerce, and we see from all speakers that there are plenty of changes and the future possibilities in our workplaces and the implications for the training, especially Khosla mentioned the e-commerce. This reminds me of the Alibaba case in China. They are the biggest e-commerce platform, and they claim that they have generated 30 million jobs in China. And the CEO of Alibaba went to the US and talked to Trump, saying, "Oh, we are bringing jobs to you because we as a platform we create jobs for you." But these in the ILO's standards are not decent jobs because they are informal jobs, right? Like individual entrepreneurs, small sellers on the e-commerce website, and the deliverymen, nowadays also fast food delivery. Plenty of workers working on those jobs. So I think all these changes calls for a fundamental restructuring of the current cost-sharing structure of training in our societies. Right? If informal workers do not have employers that should be held accountable for pay for their training, for offering continuing training for these workers, upskilling. Who's going to be responsible for this? I mean, the state and the employers, of course, need to pay, but we need to think of new ways of having these players, holding them accountable, but also innovative strategies to make them invest in skill training. So I'm not sure I want you guys to answer this comment/question. This is some ideas that I'm thinking.
We'll take a couple of questions.
My name is Anish Mishra. I have 2 questions to ask. The first question is actually directed to Mr. Yap, since you spoke about Singapore, India. It's about the comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. Okay, India has there's some sources saying that Singapore has actually violated this agreement because now in Singapore there's a camp of Indian IT professionals who want to seek employment visa to Singapore. So I just want to know your perspective on this. And we talk about Singapore actually assisting India. How about India assisting Singapore, whereby we send our professionals there to get IT training? So instead of getting their IT professionals, we train our IT professionals there. My second question is directed to Dr. Divya Nambiar. It's on women participation in the labor force. Okay, if you look at the birth rate of Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, Pakistan is 3.55. India 2.4 and Bangladesh 2.14. And the reason why Bangladesh has been able to keep its birth rate down because because of microfinancing, the women there are able to start small businesses. They are able to work in garment factories, and by them earning income, they are empowered to actually have some control over in the family, in the size of the family. So the thing is that I would like to know what's India doing to ensure that that women stay in the workforce, in the workforce, even
Anish, you're going a little bit beyond the skill. We're not talking about demography or planning or.
No, it's related skill because
I get more specific.
Yeah, sorry. Because we invest in skill training of a woman, but then what if she gets married and she drops out of the labor force? How this investment is wasted? So there's something must be done to keep women in the labor force. Thank you.
My name is Siva. Just I would like to ask one of the speaker can answer about the artificial intelligence. So my thinking is maybe another 10-15 years time, maybe we never talk about the skill future or something like that, because everything will be run by the artificial intelligence. Maybe that one device will be developed. Everybody said to talk to the device, I want to be this to be done. So automatically is a plug and play. Those things will be ordered automatically. So maybe the skill future development, maybe costing in 15 years time. That is my thinking. So what about yours?
We'll come back for a second question.
Dr. Yap, Dr. Chan, I just want to quickly highlight, I think the reflection from what Dr. Chan and Siva just mentioned makes me think about the distinction between digital skill and non-digital skill. I think this is an important aspect. A lot of what we discussed this morning also touches on the digital aspect. Atul also talked about this. And this is, I think, going to be one of the big dichotomy in the future. That 20 years ago, when you look at the business, the question was, are you online? And www. If you don't even have an online address, you could still do business, and you probably are a good business. Today, if you don't even have a website, nobody takes you seriously. So I think that's going to be the same issue when we look at 20 years from now. Anybody who is in the workforce or is employed or is self-employed in some way will ask this question: are you digital or are you analog? Right? So this is, I think, a very key aspect of it. I don't really have an answer because at this point, the digital domain itself is moving pretty quickly. Different skills, different applications, how people participate in the digital economy are also quite varied. Whether it's in e-commerce or fintech, I mean, there are very distinct layers to that. And the participants actually are at all levels, from the entrepreneur to big companies to individuals offering small services to someone just trying to start a business and putting an email server in his computer and all that. So I think that's one key thing that I take from your question. We have to ask ourselves, do we want to address digital? Do we have a digital test for all our participants who come to our companies for interviews? Should governments embrace digital in a big way or not? Because that also has implications on budgets and resources. But there are deep questions, and especially for India, it's huge population base. At which point do you say digital is important? And how do you invest in that? So I thought that was one of the thoughts. Coming to Anish's question, I think your question is a very good one. It's also the same question that the India ambassador to Singapore asked me last year when I was in my previous capacity in Singapore about skills, about CETA. I think I'll just quickly, in a nutshell, share with everybody that the construct of the concept of CETA, or the Comprehensive Economic Partnership between Singapore and India, was first signed way back more than 10 years ago when then the Prime Minister of Goh Chok Tong said that we need to look towards India as India looks east. And Singapore took the lead to sign that. That was not the best form of an FTA that we had with India, but we argue that if we are not relevant to India as a market, then we need growth drivers, and India also needs growth drivers, we need each other. And so therefore the trade agreement was signed. Shortly after that, we brought on ASEAN, and then after that we have now the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement, which is a lot more comprehensive. In fact, it's a lot deeper than what we did for the Singapore-India Comprehensive Partnership. And some of those chapters also include what you mentioned, for free movement of people. The more recent allegations or the more recent reports, I would say, in the newspapers that Singapore is reducing the number of employment passes and all that, it turned out to be untrue. Because when we checked with, then when I was in my previous capacity, I checked with the Ministry of Trade, and they also checked with the Ministry of Manpower. The truth is that we actually have been increasing the number of visas given, but at a lower rate. So it's still increasing. It was not negative. And I think quite quickly it was overshadowed by the US with the H-1B reaction. So the conversation shifted from Singapore to another country and all that. But the truth of the matter is we are not restricting. I think that's one of the, but we are looking to balance. And that was the view that I was given at the time. On whether Singapore should, more IT professionals should go to India, I think IT as a skill is one thing, but I think Singapore should go to India to learn some innovation. we are in desperate need of innovation, and there's a lot of innovation minds in India which is untapped. So I wouldn't advocate an IT professional in Singapore going to India to learn IT, but I think they should go there with a broader mind and go to India and open their mind and learn innovation, because we are pretty straight thinkers, whereas India, they can see different dimensions of things. Sad fact, of course, is that the IIM and IIT admissions are not always, there are some limitations with how much foreign students they can take and all that. We've always advocated that there should be more Singaporeans living, studying in some of the top prestigious universities in India, but they don't always open their doors, you know, in that sense, because their places are so limited. It's a highly prestigious school to get into. So it's not for lack of wanting, but sometimes the demand may be there, but supply is absent somewhere. I hope that kind of addresses what it is.
Just quickly on the labour force participation rate issue, this is a challenge in India. In fact, while women are getting higher levels of education, we find a declining labour force participation rate. However, as Dipinder said, these are big policy questions that unfortunately the ministry itself cannot address. I think it has to be an economic policy decision of the Ministry of Labour and Employment. I think they are now trying to really focus on increasing the labour force participation rate through career portals and specific kinds of programs. But I'm not too familiar with it because it falls under another ministry.
I think adding to what Dr. Divya said about expectation and aspirations, if our policy makers are able to create at different levels systems of rewards, so that people don't feel that their point of arrival should be a CEO. Their point of arrival could be, I'm the best restaurant in the town. That actually is a very good point to arrive at. You know, some of the best Michelin-star restaurants in Japan are only one. They never think about scaling and conquering the empire. They're happy with one. And these are aspirational for many of the smaller segments. So it could be that we could, as policy makers, create certain spaces, create certain systems of rewards for people to arrive at different points in the domestic market. They don't always need to compete globally. India has this particular unique opportunity. Singapore, our economic space is a little tight. We may not be able to do that, but in India, I think we can.
Just a quick, sorry, based on experience, have you seen any link between female labor force participation and birth rate? Any link between female labor force participation and birth rate?
Birth rate?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with it.
Sorry.
Okay, just a couple of comments to Dr. Chang and Seva, and I think there's enough, my colleagues have kind of talked about the skills in India. I think first question in terms of who's responsible for building the new skills. And I think the reality is that today, I called it out earlier, the collaboration within the industry, education and government policies is not enough. I think there's a good opportunity, because organizations are in a very segmented way, trying to do their own little stuff. And I think if there's a broader platform, a better, more proactive coordination, we can actually build a more responsive ecosystem for building the right skills. It is there in parts, it's not fully developed, and that's a big opportunity. And that's where we take responsibility as a collective force of people who need these skills and who need jobs or need to create these opportunities. So that's one potential opportunity I see, not only here, but I think it's probably a broader issue. On your question on artificial intelligence, and I want to kind of refer to the watch industry, because I lived in Switzerland for years. It's very interesting because Apple Watch today in terms of volume is probably the largest selling watch in the world. But in terms of value, the Swiss industry, which is handcrafted watches, that people sitting in villages trying to create these watches, is the still highest value watch out there. And that's a great example of how you can create unique segmentation. When you give the example of being the best restaurant chairs, I mean, you may have a small restaurant, but if it is unique and it offers value, there is going to be a need or a real need for that. So I think it will coexist. I do feel that artificial intelligence is there to enable better efficiency, better effectiveness. But there will still be a core industry which will require a human skill and human efforts.
Thank you. We have 3 pending questions, Mr. Abhinav.
Well, I'll just give a request. I really enjoyed what you talked about, especially as a skill provider. I spoke about it briefly yesterday. One of the big challenges we face is when we work on the placement and post-placements, the migration support is lacking in India. And so I wanted to tie two threads here. As we are planning this new capital city in Amaravati, I would request Mr. Yap if you could also look into things like workmen hostels. I think they're absolutely essential. I've heard that they happen in China and it's missing in India. If you could really plan for that, especially this industry plan. Even the services sector, for example, we place so many young girls in Chennai and boys in Chennai and Bangalore who work in cafes and restaurants, but there isn't a housing market at the bottom of the pyramid, very low cost housing. So that's something which we're missing in all of our urban planning, if you could take that into account. And the other suggestions, so these are not questions actually, these are suggestions. We're also working on similar models of workmen hostels in Pune, in the NCR region, where we combine them with learning centers of the university. So we enroll the students who are working in factories into higher education programs, and we also support them with low-cost housing. And they enroll, and one day of the week is spent, or a few hours every week is spent in a small learning center created in the hostel. So we would love to explore that with you in Main Street City. Maybe we can talk about that.
Dr. Shortly.
In the morning, so I apologize if the question has already been answered in the morning. You talked about a lot. But what I've been listening to is so much about creating and encouraging agency in people, that they take control of their lives, make their own choices, and they're empowered. Now, in your experience, to what extent is the basic problem then literacy? I mean, if you don't have the basic fundamentals, are we just, is it all talk in the end? And coming back to the Secretary Krishnan's comment right at the beginning, that Ministry of Skills should come under Ministry of Education. So in your experience, how much is that the roadblock, basic literacy?
I just had a comment on the use of the term ecosystem, which came up in several different ways. I think it's an important thing to think about, because many people use the word ecosystem to sort of identify all of the actors and institutions in the space. But that's not the way it is intended. The idea of the ecosystem is, is think about the baby in the tummy, right? So you need a catalyst to start the baby process off. But then you need nourishment, so the mother has to eat well, and all kinds of nourishment, playing music so that the baby's mind expands, and all of that right in the womb. And then you need a supporting environment for that baby to not only come up but grow, right? And this is the logic. So when we talk about a high skills ecosystem, there are definitive parts to it. We have to identify catalysts, the sources of nourishment. So in Silicon Valley, it was, the venture capital industry. But Stanford University, Hewlett and Packard were students at Stanford, and so those are acting. And all the students, engineering students at Stanford who finished, went and started working in HP, so it's intellectual nourishment. And then the supporting environment, and that includes things like hostels. So I think it's a really useful term because it has its own definition of various components. So if you want to read an article, I just passed one to Divya about creating how high-skilled ecosystems can be created. It outlines all of these. So it's a useful piece of reading for those who are interested in it.
Can we just add a comment to what Mr. Madan was saying regarding Amaravati? The moment he mentioned that the city of Chandigarh, which have an association, came to mind. It's a very well-planned city. It's a pleasure to drive through, very organized. But the city is exceptionally unkind to people on the margin. There is no space. The ITI, for instance, is right on the periphery. Designed by Corbusier, and I think it's intended to be, given the plaza, to be more of in a European landscape to some extent. But its city is run by migrants and other people coming from the countryside, and they've been just literally shunted out. So in that sense, it's a city lacking in compassion, oblivious of the ground realities of India. But if you could take, this is such a fascinating project you're embarking on, please take a minute or two, entirely at your discretion, talk about the parameters of what you would be doing now.
Give a bit more context to the project. This is a capital city that is about 200 square kilometers, roughly one-third the size of Singapore. And as the developer, or the master developer, we will be looking to develop the first 6-7 square kilometers, similar to the size of the factory. In Singapore terms, this is about the size of maybe Ang Mo Kio, something like an Ang Mo Kio town. There's a great desire by the Chief Minister and his cabinet and his team to not have this as an administrative capital. Where people come in to the day to work and then they leave and it's a ghost town at night. The model here, when we tell him that Singapore may not be the best model, but the archetype, the vision that he has in mind is similar to what we see in Singapore. A vibrant city, a very compact one. There is the government, there's parliament, and Supreme Court, and there is the CBD, and then a little further away you've got economic activity, manufacturing and all that. So then the question now is that it's a green field. Adjacent to it is 1 million people living in the city of Vijayawada. That comes with associated a certain set of skills, economic endowments already, in terms of the people, what they can give, skills and all that, and productivity. Then there's a green field next to it, which is currently 29 habitations, largely farm villages and all that, which is being then prepared for a new capital city. So now the question then is, if we build it, will they come? And even if we build very nice condos, if the very brilliant and very intelligent Telugu diaspora everywhere starts buying condominiums but don't live there, we will also have an issue. So then how do we then generate economic activity? So these are the type of questions that we're asking, where it's completely greenfield, within a maybe 50-kilometer radius, there are very little factories or economic activity. Sri City is easily a few hundred kilometers further down in the south. What are the drivers? And if the government were to create assets to enable or to start to catalyze, I think Professor Kuruvilla said it best, the baby begins to catalyze, to catalyze and then you bring a nourishment. We see the current economic endowments of the state, of the region. Then the question is, what economic policy? If we give a tax incentive, how much? Who? Is it even meaningful? What kind of jobs will it create? And what industry should we give it to? Should it be a sector? Should it be an SEZ? If it's SEZ, how does it help it will largely be export oriented. How will it help to pull the industry in the ground? And so some of these, in terms of some of these ideas that we're talking about, different dimensions, on the physical space, we are thinking of how to translate that down into investable assets. And this is where, from a concept, an economic development concept, it comes down to a price. How many $1 billion or how many crores do we put to invest? And we'll be building some of these ahead of demand. How do we build it correctly, build it wisely, so that capital is not wasted and the returns will come according to how we planned it. There are some earlier ideas like developing what we call rental factories, really small assets, borrowing the idea of elephant and the flea, large multinational, large companies, or even large local companies, Tatas and all that, may want to be hub there, but will need to then tap on small enterprises to support their growth. Small enterprises may not want to build their own factories. Should the government finance these factories? At what cost? A little bit like what we used to have in the JTC days. Flatted factories, so that you come, you plug and play, you bring your machines. At what cost do we do it? Should the developer do it? Should the government do it? How do we share this? These are deep questions. It's almost like we're trying to plan a pregnancy. To borrow your idea here, we're trying to plan a pregnancy from the day one, conceive a new city. I think that's roughly the type of challenges we have. And of course, against all this, India's very vibrant democracy. Every other day there will be a news report. We have an opposition. We also have people who don't believe in the thing. We have all types of movements at the same time. And on top of this, the fundamental thing is a belief that the people of Andhra and the people of the cities want to build a new city for the future. There will be aspirations. Can we meet that and do it in a way that people don't get angry and get all upset that things are not moving meet within certain expectations within certain timelines. These are some of the dimensions that we have come to thinking about. So I really like what Professor Kuruvela talked about, and we'd love to get a copy of the article that you shared earlier. How do we create an ecosystem? Everybody sees it when it runs, when it's in this operating state like Silicon Valley. Oh yeah, you know, we slice and dice these ecosystems into all the elements and all the layers. Right? What was Silicon Valley like 50 years ago, 40 years ago? How did it start? That's the question that we are faced with. How do you conceive and let it grow? I think that's the kind of challenge that we face. And what are the different skills future? But I must say, digital seems to be one of the things that comes to my mind. That anyone in the future domain must be probably wants to be a digital participant, has to be a digital participant. And the city we build will likely have to be digitally enabled too. But what does that mean in the physical form? I'm not too sure. But in a nutshell, this is where we are for the project.
We hope you will do a good job.
God willing, thank you.
Just to quickly address the question on initial conditions in education, that's certainly a big challenge, and I'm sure Mr. Madan would know about it much more, because for training providers, they have a group of young people, all of whom have different kinds of competencies, and the standards of education also vary hugely. So to get all these diverse people on the same platform and teach them skills in a very short window of time and make them employable is a huge challenge for training providers. So I think those are base level skills combined with critical thinking and analytical skills, which are not prioritized at all in the education system, I think are a huge challenge.
Mr. Khosla, any comments? I think we have time for one more question, if there is any.
So this is from Mr. Yap.
The Wilson family.
Anyway,
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Yap, now, if you have a kind of new master planner, right? How do you negotiate?
The role of master developer.
The role of master planner and developer, right? Or not planner?
Technically, the master plan is completed. Executing.
So what I'm saying is, how did you go about negotiating state interests? And were there diverse groups within the states? Who were these groups? And how is you as a foreign agency negotiating that?
I'll try to summarize in 2 minutes what took 3 years for us to get to this point. It started actually with the bifurcation of the state in 2014. Then the Chief Minister, Chandrababu Naidu, called upon SM Goh Chok Tong, who was then formerly PM. The two men actually had a connection years back. And what happened was that when he fell out of power, actually this is what he told us, when Chandrababu Naidu fell out of power, many countries, he claimed, stopped meeting him. They met the new government, met the new Chief Minister. So he became the opposition. But when he came to Singapore, then I think our PM Goh Chok Tong honored his visit and still met him in Istana. And because of that, he felt, Singapore is a friend. It doesn't matter whether I'm Chief Minister or not Chief Minister, but Singapore values me and values the state and values India. So when he came back to power this time around, actually he made a meeting and requested that Singapore consider coming in to help to develop master developer role. The reality is that for the Singapore companies, Ascendas-Singbridge and Sembcorp, we have never undertaken such a project of such a scale in India before. We are very good at doing business parks, maybe 50 acres, 40 acres, 5 blocks. We develop it, we fill it up with tenants, all types of innovative people work in our parks. We sell it to a REIT, we recycle the capital and we redevelop. And we have about 10 million square feet in, say, 5 cities across India. To build a new master development of a city is what we call a Tier 1 development. You are essentially laying out the roads, raising the platform, basically doing plumbing. Commercially, it really doesn't make a lot of money because digging, plumbing and all that, you make more money selling condominiums, buying the land and selling many units. It's not a very profitable venture for a company. But he called on Singapore, and I think the Singapore government responded. Shareholders also thought about it, and we say that yes, I think if we want to do this, we could. But provided we are appointed in a fair and transparent manner. And that's, I think, and the Chief Minister also wanted it. And that's where there was a process where he invited us. He said we were happy to submit to a tender, whatever that is required. But we were guided by the state that we should submit a proposal. I think they call it the Swiss challenge proposal, Swiss challenge method of appointing, which we did. We submitted, and I think there also, thankfully, I think India has a very democratic process. There were people who came forward to say, this is not the right way, that's the right way. There were certain challenges in court, and many of these allegations were overturned. The process continued, and I think early this year in May, we were appointed. So actually, it is a private sector undertaking, in this case, an enterprise-driven project by Ascendas-Singbridge and Sembcorp, but it is government supported. So there is a government committee chaired by Chief Minister Naidu and Minister Iswaran from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, which is a Singapore government layer, and they talk largely about the different policies and objectives that they can do to build a new city. At the same time, at the enterprise level, the capital that comes from the enterprise will be pumped in by the Singapore consortium, but we also included the government in this case. The Andhra government is part of us in the joint venture. So I think the rewards are being shared, the development, the risk of course will be shared too, because when we go along with this project, it also means that whatever risk that the current government undertakes, as a developer, we also undertake. Of course, whatever commercial risk we undertake, they also have to share and go along. So the partnership is built in this way, but it's again at many levels. So I think in India, as with all things in India, everything is multifaceted. There is no single flavor, one would say. There's no single flavor in the masala. So in the same way, this particular partnership is built in that kind of the same kind of recipe. That's how I would sum it up in 3 minutes.
And if I may just add a footnote to that, if you want to learn more about India, you're not still there, I would strongly urge you to buy a book called Culture Shock India, written by Mr. Benjamin Yap's partner, Ms. Vidal.
My better half just published a book, The Culture Shock India, a little tongue-in-cheek about Indian culture and how she sees it, but in a very nice, humorous way. Encourage all of you to pick out a copy.
Very informative volume indeed. I would stand between you and lunch. Just a couple of very quick concluding observations. I think we've had an outstanding workshop, two absolutely without the risk of hyperbole, two outstanding keynote presentations. Dr. Krishna's presentation yesterday was probably analytically the most insightful one I've come across, and a very candid assessment of the constraints faced by Singapore on the policy side. And this morning by Mr. Manish Sabharwal, for those of you who were here, instance of a remarkable initiative taken in the private sector to deal with the complexities of India's labor regulations. We've managed to touch upon all the relevant issues of the huge mismatch and the lags that exist between the supply, the massive supply, and the perpetual seeming paucity of skilled labor in India, and how there are efforts being made to address that. We've had incisive analytical insights from Professor Suresh Kuruvilla right through, and from Dr. Zhang Hao. Thank you for that. On the other side, on the practice, it's not all gloom and doom. Mr. Abhinav Madan's account of Ram Taran is one of, I hope there are many more, silver linings on the horizon. I personally had goosebumps just listening to that. Dr. Lakshmi Narayan's talk on Andhra Pradesh, and a very candid assessment of the challenges that have been faced thus far. And I won't carry on with the others. We had a remarkably good and diverse and yet integrated concluding session. And I'm glad, I thought when we were designing the program, I was feeling very almost queasy about the fact that we're ignoring about 83% of the population in the informal sector, and the huge gender issue, which is only getting worse to some extent in India. And I'm glad Dr. Nambiar and others have raised that. Mr. Madan brought that up, and that's a critically important issue. And Mr. Khosla also brought that up in his observations about the very pioneering attempt to have and doggedly sticking to the proposition of having 50% of the labor force in the C3 project. So what's the net outcome of this? I hope we're research think tank, and one of the takeaways is you're going to leave with more questions than answers to inform and try to understand what's been going on and try to comprehend a little bit of the skills development landscape. We might trouble you, the speakers, for short accounts of the speeches. It's not a requirement, it's purely voluntary, but we do want to share with a much broader audience, and I think this merited a much broader audience, and we have a wide readership. So I'll get back to you on the specifics, but on behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies, thank you very much for sparing your very valuable time and for sharing your insights. In a round of applause for the participants.
Thank you, Dr. Randhawa. I would now like to invite Dr. Randhawa to present some tokens of appreciation to our speakers. Firstly, Mr. Benjamin Yap. Next, Dr. Nambiar.
Point out I've been consulting with Dr. Nambiar right through the program, and at all odd hours, and she's been very grateful.
And Mr. Khosla. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the ISAS workshop on skills development. Lunch is provided in the foyer outside. We thank you for your participation and hope to see you at upcoming ISAS events. Thank you and have a pleasant afternoon.